Elizabeth,
John, how are you?
good. Thanks so much for joining me today. Elizabeth Cronan is the Vice President of Government Relations at Geoguard, and we were fortunate to talk to your colleague, David Briggs, several weeks ago. And I wanted an opportunity to chat with you about your previous life, which isn't completely your previous life because you're obviously still engaged in the gaming community, but wanted to chat with you a bit. You came from the AGA. You were Senior Director of Gaming Policy, and there was a number of things I thought our community could really learn from you. And if we have if we have an opportunity to talk through this, that this would be pretty valuable. So the first thing I would start with is, as you know, because we've known each other for a couple of years, I come from the sort of traditional AML community, Bankers Association, worked for a bank, that sort of thing. So pretty familiar, obviously, with how traditional financial institutions deal with financial crime prevention and AML. But the gaming industry obviously has its own unique challenges. It's certainly different in many, many ways. I mean, you do have suspicious activity reporting, some other things. What would be the biggest thing that traditional bank AML people don't either understand or would find interesting about the distinction between what folks in gaming have to do in AML and financial crime preventions versus traditional banks?
Sure. No, it's a great question, and thank you again for having me. And I should note that you spoke with my boss too. I would love to say colleague, but it was David is my boss and the CEO of Geoguard. But absolutely, in terms of some of the distinctions between kind of the traditional financial institutions and banks and some of the gaming operators. Of course, there are the obvious nuances, right? The in terms of operational nuances, there's certainly different environments, and there's certainly different consumer and customer expectations when you walk into a bank versus when you either walk into a casino or when you're engaging in some type of online gaming or mobile sports betting. But I think one really unique and quite interesting distinction that we're really seeing now is around how the gaming industry is really leveraging innovation and more innovative tools to strengthen their AML reporting, to strengthen the effectiveness of their regimes. And I think one area that we can point to, certainly something we see very closely at Geoguard and our sister company GeoComply, is the way that they're leveraging real sophisticated geolocation tools to detect fraud, to strengthen the types of suspicious activity monitoring that they're doing, using that as kind of a key indicator of risk or indicator of suspicious activity. So for years, we've seen this trend where casinos were really looking to the banks, looking to the traditional financial institutions to base their programs on what they saw, the foundations that the banks had in place. But now we're starting to see this shift, right, where you're seeing the gaming industry is really becoming quite innovative in the types of tools, the types of innovations they're embracing and utilizing to really strengthen their overall AML regimes. And I think banks and certainly other financial institutions can look to the sector to see how they're utilizing this type of data and beyond just a traditional IP address, using more kind of multi-sourced geolocation data points to get a more precise and accurate depiction, which is critical.
So what would be an example or two of red flag indicators in gaming that could be indicative of money laundering or financial crime? So in banks, you have structuring transactions below 10,000. Obviously, you have wire transactions right after a big deposit. So there's all these sort of historical indicators. What would be a general indicator that the gaming industry looks for and that could potentially result in the filing of a suspicious activity report?
Sure. If you see activity that just, I think the lack of a legitimate business purpose is a great example. If they're seeing, that's why the industry's done a great job in terms of the extensive training and that the employees really are kind of that front line of defense. But if they see transactions where they just don't really make sense, right? Where all of a sudden you're bringing in a lot of money and you play for a real short amount of time, that could be indicative of someone trying to attempt to launder funds through the facility. Again, in the online environment, if you see, someone put a lot of money on an account and then just play for a short amount of time and try
Right.
to cash out, that type of activity is certainly going to be indicative of something potentially nefarious happening as well. Again, looking at, the role of geolocation technology and how that's used to detect suspicious activity. If you see that there are multiple accounts in the online environment being set up on one device, that immediately is going to be a red flag as well. That could be indicative of some type of identity fraud or something may be going on. And that's going to, the operator will get an alert, and they'll undertake some further investigation there to get a better sense of what may be happening.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you say, the technology use, I know some banks are doing some innovative things, but yeah, I think your industry clearly has done quite a bit, and probably is sort of at an advantage because, I've been in gaming establishments where they've showed us the security facilities, and it's pretty amazing, the data, not just the video, but all sorts of information. So it would just be logical that your community would be pretty aggressive in using technology. So that does make a lot of sense. Now, in the banking industry, one of the things that we constantly grapple with is different size institutions. So you have multinational institutions, you got large, mid-size, and then the community banks. And while they have similar things they look for, resources and other things are different based on the size. What's the do we have it? I assume it's similar with large properties versus regional properties and even tribal properties. Are there not distinctions in what they follow and pay attention to? Because I'm sure they all have the same obligations to be proactive and do proper due diligence. But what's the biggest challenges for different size institutions? Is it sort of typical? It's resources, it's technology, or for those of us that don't know how these things operate, what would you say are the differences, if any, between different size gaming properties?
No, it's a great question. I mean, certainly, and again, this is an area where I think the industry's done an excellent job, but taking, each casino operation or each online gaming operation or mobile sports betting operation, there's going to be different risk factors, right? And so the compliance officer that's in charge of overseeing that entity is going to have to take a real careful analysis and really closely evaluate, what's the gaming volume that's coming in? What type of games are being offered? Different games present different risks as well. What's the customer base? If for a smaller local casino, is it primarily patrons within the 30-mile radius of that property, whereas some of the larger, massive operators on the strip, they may be drawing patrons from an international major international destinations. So they'll have a different right. customer base as well. Of course, there needs to be careful evaluation as well on kind of the types of financial services that are being offered. There's going to be variance too, depending on the size of an organization. If they're extending the line of credit, for example, the types of offerings that are provided behind the cage as well. So all of those kind of factors, need careful evaluation when you're tailoring an effective program that is designed to clearly mitigate any risks that come with the different offerings whether it's a land-based casino or online or mobile offering too.
What's the difference with tribal properties? I mean, obviously the governance oversight is different, but from a practical standpoint, are there distinctions between tribal gaming properties versus those that are not?
In terms of, fundamentally, all casino operations, that generate more than $1 million in revenue annually, and again, this includes online operations, they'll all be subject to the BSA. So there's not a distinction in terms of BSA applicability for commercial operated venues versus any tribal operated entity. So there's that universal application of the BSA if you meet that $1 million threshold. And then in terms of the examination authority too, FinCEN has delegated that to the IRS. And so the IRS has that examination authority over both, the commercial and the tribal entities as well. So there's, in terms of kind of the regulatory oversight and the enforcement, there's commonality across all of the gaming entities, regardless of whether they're kind of tribal operated or a commercial entity.
That reminds me on enforcement. I know that in the traditional banking space, when we see an enforcement action, we use it as a training tool. And so typically, whether it's a large, small, or mid-sized institution, some of the themes in traditional financial institution enforcement actions have been internal control issues, training issues, resource allocation, failure to use the appropriate software to detect suspicious activity reporting. What are some general themes in any of the public enforcement actions that have been held against gaming properties in terms of deficiencies that are useful to train people that are trying to figure out areas where there can be improvement?
No, absolutely. And I'll say too, this is another area where I know that, the industry certainly looks to those types of actions and scrutinizes every finding and looks at those very carefully and as learning opportunities to make sure that their programs either currently are designed to ensure that the issues that were found in an enforcement action could not be replicated in their operation. And they're certainly, used as a training and learning tool. But I think there's commonality, right, in what you see in some of the banking enforcement actions with what has previously been cited in some of the more gaming-oriented enforcement actions. I'll touch on a few themes. I think one that we frequently see is just the focus and the importance of using all available information. And this is obviously a big issue for gaming operators too, because they do have such rich and invaluable data on their customers, but really ensuring that the compliance team, the BSA officer, has that holistic view of patron activity across every aspect of the casino operation, whether that's in the land-based environment or in the online environment, ensuring that there aren't any gaps, there aren't any silos, to making sure all of that information is being reviewed, analyzed, and evaluated for BSA compliance purposes. That's critical. And again, on that point, we know in recent years there's been a big focus from FinCEN on cyber-related issues, the cyber indicators. You need to have the right structure in place internally to ensure that you are getting those cyber indicators and they're making their way into SAR reporting. We know there's a need for, at a minimum, that IP address, but certainly in the industry where we know that the industry operators are collecting more than an IP address, they have more robust, more accurate geolocation data. That type of information needs to be making its way into SARs where there is an incident of suspicious activity. And again, we know that's going to be more meaningful for law enforcement. That's more accurate. That's more authentic, and actionable intelligence that law enforcement can benefit from. So that utilization of all available information is something that is frequently seen across a number of enforcement actions. Another theme that has been consistent ever since a few years ago in the MoneyGram case initially is the issue of personal liability and really looking to hold an individual accountable for corporate wrongdoing. That's, again, consistently been a theme of FinCEN enforcement actions. But even as recently as, last week, I'm sure you looked at the DOJ's, the criminal division's updated guidance that came out. And, it could not be more clear there. There's a provision in there that one of the most effective ways to combat corporate wrongdoing is holding individuals accountable. So I think that just, again, it's another authoritative source underscoring this notion that, the government is going to look to hold an individual accountable for corporate wrongdoing. We frequently hear, the corporate entity doesn't make decisions, individuals do. Right. And so I think that, that continues to be an important area of focus.
That's interesting. And I totally agree. I think corporate liability, individual liability, all those things, a lot of people have the perception, and it's not completely untrue, that white-collar criminals don't get what should be coming to them from time to time. So I think MoneyGram and Brown Brothers and other cases told us that that's that's changed. But it leads me to something else. A couple of years ago, when you were at AGA and I was at ACAMS, I know that AGA came out, I think it was the first go around, and I know it's been updated with a series of best practices. And so that was your members coming to you and saying, these are things that, if done, in addition to requirements that needed to be done, will make our community strong in terms of being proactive and that sort of thing. And the whole notion of culture, support, tone at the top. When FinCEN did their corporate culture or culture of compliance advisory from a couple of years ago, it wasn't earth shattering, but it was really the first time, like you say, what they said, we need to see support there. I know that even in traditional banks, you could run into some CEOs that will say, hey, we're not law enforcement. We'll do what we have to do. I think the lion's share of compliance officers don't buy into that. What's been the general mindset? Because, I can envision where the gaming industry would say, well, wait a second. Yeah, we have to be careful about fraud, but, we're not banks. And that's always sort of a hue and cry that you hear from other institutions. We shouldn't have to do the same thing. What were the challenges when you put the best practices together? Good, solid document. You got some really positive feedback, not only from FinCEN, but from the FATF, as I recall. So I have to think that means there's strength at the top of the ticket, if you will, in your previous industry, that they've sort of embraced that they do have obligations. So if you can kind of briefly walk us through when you guys started the best practices to where we are today, because it looks like there's been major improvements, and not that they needed all the improvements, but it's clear that there's been an embracing, my view, on the sidelines of the gaming industry saying, yes, we're part of this and we need to do more.
No, absolutely. I mean, the industry absolutely, they've embraced the role that they play when it comes to this issue, embraced their role as a partner in working closely with the federal government. There's an appreciation that they do play a unique role, kind of being that first line of defense to detect suspicious activity, report that, ensuring that the most actionable, the most effective information is getting to the government via the BSA reporting process. And so I think that, that really over the past 5 or 6 years just continues to strengthen. And, it's kind of an honor, and there's a recognition that this is a critically important issue, and investments need to be made to honor that. And you see considerable investments made, whether it's to expanded compliance departments, investments to resources, whether that, again, on the technological standpoint or innovative standpoint, but also training and attending conferences, those types of things. There's been just tremendous growth. And years ago when we first started on that initiative, there was just a small number of operators closely involved in it, and it quickly expanded, to become a much more significant undertaking. And, this most recent document is now reflective of, a far more diverse industry and many, diverse range of games that are offered. And certainly as expansion continues in the online and the mobile gaming environment, I think the importance of this issue is underscored. It's that much more important. I think as expansion into sports has taken place, I think, the commitment to AML to BSA compliance has remained kind of steadfast and at the forefront of that expansion too.
Right. And if folks are interested, they can obviously go to AGA's website. Like I said, FATF certainly has covered the gaming industry and the AML. Leads me to the last topic, and you just referenced it. Given where we are, even though I've seen that Las Vegas has reopened, it does certainly seem that for quite a while, we're going to be, those that are interested in gaming will find that the online mobile gaming to be the option. I'm not saying the safer option, but for some, it will be the safer option. So how has that grown? And I know that like where we are in Washington, D.C., they're going to have, they're going to have gaming, and in other states, laws have been approved to create new opportunities for gaming. What do we need to understand about the online and mobile gaming space in terms of compliance and training and all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a careful evaluation of the risks, right? And ensuring that you have the appropriate measures in place. One of the most critical is a strong, effective KYC regime. And what's interesting in the online environment, at the outset, before a patron can place $1, any wager at all, even if it's $1, they need to undergo a very robust KYC onboarding process.
Right.
It's very stringent ID verification, authentication. The geolocation component is a part of that as well. So that's different than the land-based environment, right? Because you're collecting that critical information that ultimately, could make its way into a BSA report right at the outset, which is, again, immensely valuable data. But yeah, we have, since the Supreme Court overturned PASPA back in May of 2018, there are now close to 20 markets that have gone live with offering sports betting in one form or another. The majority of those are online. There's a mobile component. As you mentioned, DC has just had kind of an initial soft launch that will continue to expand once the sports betting leagues are kind of back and live. But there are a number of states, too, that have legalized and are now currently in the rule and reg-making process that will be moving online as well, including Illinois in the very near term. Tennessee will be coming online, Virginia, and then Michigan as well. And then, 2 other states to watch that there's expectation that they may legalize between now and the end of the year are Ohio and Maryland. So it's an area of considerable expansion and growth in the industry. And as land-based operators are expanding into this area too, it's important that they're ensuring that when they're integrating with a digital partner, they're making sure that the proper measures and procedures are in place so that they can integrate them into their overall AML BSA reporting regime, because ultimately they're the ones that have that obligation. And so they need to make sure that they have, their partners have the right measures, the right triggers in place to detect activity so that they're getting the data they need so that they can fulfill their BSA reporting obligations.
Yeah, this is going to be really fascinating. And obviously we all want to see sports come back. So not just so people can wager on sports, but for all the other reasons that people like to approach that. Get you out of here on this. If people wanted to learn more about any of this, again, the online world that's changing rapidly, or just gaming, obviously AGA is a great source. FinCEN and IRS, so FinCEN's obviously published some advisories in the gaming space. Anything else you'd recommend in terms of resource information for those that are trying to learn, how the gaming industry interacts from a compliance perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I think AGA is a good source of information and resources. You'll find the best practices there. Anyone that's interested in learning more about the role that geolocation plays in ensuring that the compliance standards are met, check out geocomply.com or geoguard.com. We've got a wealth of information and resources there as well.
Great. Well, Elizabeth Cronan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We're hoping here at RightSource to do a number of interviews with people from your community so we can better understand how it fits into the compliance patchwork that we all deal with. Because, years ago, it was, as I've told many people since I've been doing this a long time, it was traditional banks. It was sort of basic cash activity. And so you didn't have to know that much to be an effective AML professional. But nowadays, with your industry, obviously MSBs, financial technology, there's so many different ways in which criminals can move. And you mentioned cyber, and cyber impacts all of us. So to be effective in this area, it's just so important to understand all the different vehicles for those that have financial footprints. And obviously gaming is really important to our community. So I really appreciate you giving us this insight today.
Thank you so much, John. I enjoyed it and look forward to future discussions.
Great.
Thank you again.
All right. Be safe. Take care.
Thank you. Likewise.